The hotel lobby was calm. Soft piano music played in the background. Guests walked in and out, rolling suitcases, laughing quietly. Everything looked normal, expensive, polished, perfect. In one corner of the lobby, a man sat alone. No sunglasses, no security, no designer suit. Just a simple jacket, hands folded, quietly waiting. His name was Keanu Reeves, but no one seemed to notice. At the front desk, a line of guests was moving fast. One by one, people were checked in within minutes. Smiles, warm greetings, room keys handed over effortlessly. Keanu watched silently. He had arrived on time. He had spoken politely. He had done everything right. Still, he was told to wait. 10 minutes passed, then 30. The manager walked by once, glanced at him briefly, and looked away. No apology, no explanation. Keanu didn't complain. An hour passed. Most people would have stood up by now. Some would have argued. Others would have demanded respect. Keanu stayed seated. 2 hours went by. The lobby emptied and filled again. New guests arrived, checked in, and disappeared into elevators. Meanwhile, the same man sat in the same chair, still waiting. Not angry, not frustrated, just quietly observing. A staff member approached the desk and whispered something to the manager. The manager shook his head, annoyed, and replied loudly enough for others to hear. "He can wait." Keanu heard it. He didn't react. No one knew who he was. And that seemed to be exactly the problem. To the manager, he didn't look important. He didn't look rich. He didn't look like someone worth rushing for. And in that moment, the decision was made not by words, but by attitude. This wasn't about availability. It wasn't about a mistake. It was about how quickly people decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. Keanu slowly checked his watch. Still, he said nothing. What the manager didn't know, what no one in that lobby realized, was that those 2 hours of waiting were about to expose something far bigger than a delayed check-in. And when the truth came out, the entire hotel would fall silent. Have you ever been ignored or disrespected just because you didn't look important? This wasn't just any hotel. The marble floors reflected the chandeliers above. Fresh flowers were replaced every few hours. Staff uniforms were pressed so sharply they looked untouched. This place sold one thing above all else: status. People didn't just come here to sleep. They came to be seen. At the front desk, the manager stood tall behind polished wood, greeting certain guests with enthusiasm. Loud laughter for some, firm handshakes for others. Room upgrades offered casually as if favors cost nothing. And then there was Keanu, still seated, still waiting. From where he sat, he could see everything. He watched how one guest was offered complimentary drinks simply because of their expensive watch. Another guest complained loudly and was instantly apologized to. Even though the issue was minor, Keanu said nothing. The manager noticed him again. This time the look lasted longer. Not curiosity, judgment. The manager leaned toward a staff member and said quietly, "Tell him we're fully booked for now." The staff member hesitated. "But sir, his reservation." The manager cut them off with a sharp hand gesture. Later, that single word carried authority and fear. The staff member nodded and walked away, eyes lowered. Keanu noticed that too. Not the words, but the way the staff moved, careful, controlled, afraid to step out of line. The lobby wasn't chaotic anymore. It was controlled. Every decision flowed from one person, the manager. To him, Keanu wasn't a guest. He was a test. How long could someone be ignored before they broke? How long before patience turned into anger? Time passed again. Another group of guests arrived, loud, confident, clearly wealthy. They were immediately welcome. The manager stepped out from behind the desk himself this time, smiled wide, called one of them sir. Keanu watched as room keys were handed over within minutes. 2 hours earlier, he had arrived quietly. Now he was invisible. A couple nearby began whispering, "Why is he still waiting?" "I don't know. Maybe he doesn't have a reservation." Keanu heard them. He didn't correct them. Because this wasn't about defending himself. It was about watching something unfold. The manager finally approached him. Not politely. He stood over Keanu, arms crossed, voice low but dismissive. "We're handling other guests right now," he said. "You'll need to be patient." Keanu looked up, not angrily, not nervously, just calmly. "I've been patient," he replied. There was no accusation in his voice, no frustration. That seemed to irritate the manager more than shouting ever would have. "Like I said," the manager continued, "you'll have to wait." And just like that, he turned and walked away. No explanation, no apology. Around them, people pretended not to listen. But everyone felt it. That uncomfortable moment when someone is publicly dismissed. The staff noticed. One employee tightened their grip on a tray. Another looked down at the floor. No one intervened. Because power doesn't need to shout, it just needs silence. Keanu leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms. And for the first time since he arrived, something shifted not in the room but in him. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was observing, studying patterns, watching who spoke, who obeyed, and who stayed silent. The manager thought he was in control. But what he didn't realize was this: control based on appearances is fragile. And the longer Keanu remained quiet, the more exposed the truth was becoming. By now, the waiting wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Keanu had stopped checking the time, not because it didn't matter, but because he already understood what was happening. Across the lobby, the manager laughed loudly with a guest who had just walked in. No reservation, no delay. Of course, sir. We'll take care of everything. Keanu watched as a room key was handed over within minutes. That was when it became clear. This wasn't about availability. It wasn't about timing. It was about who the manager thought mattered. A young staff member approached Keanu again, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm really sorry," she said quietly, eyes darting toward the desk. "We're still sorting things out." Keanu nodded politely. "It's all right," he said. But she didn't walk away immediately. She hesitated. Then, lowering her voice even more, she added, "He doesn't usually make people wait this long." Keanu met her eyes. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She already knew. Across the room, the manager noticed the interaction. His expression tightened. He walked over quickly this time. "What's the problem?" he asked sharply. The staff member froze. "Nothing, sir. I'll handle it." The manager interrupted, not even looking at her. She stepped back immediately. The message was clear. He turned to Keanu. "Like I said," the manager continued, "we're busy. You'll have to wait." There was something different in his tone now. Not just dismissal, control. Keanu glanced around the lobby. People were watching, pretending not to, but watching all the same. No one spoke. No one stepped in. This is how disrespect survives. Not through loud cruelty, but quiet permission. Keanu stood up slowly. The manager straightened, almost defensive, as if expecting an argument. But it didn't come. Keanu simply adjusted his jacket and said calmly, "I'm not in a rush." That answer caught the manager off guard. Most people begged for attention. Others demanded it. Keanu did neither. The manager forced a smile. "Good," he replied. "Then this shouldn't be a problem." And with that, he turned his back again. Keanu sat back down. Around him, the atmosphere had changed. The whispers were louder now. Why is he being treated like that? Did he do something wrong? Maybe he can't afford the place. Keanu heard every word. He didn't defend himself. Because this wasn't about him proving anything. It was about letting people reveal who they were when they thought no one important was watching. Minutes passed. Then more. Another staff member walked by and avoided eye contact. Another guest stared openly now, confused. One man shook his head and muttered, "That's not right." Still, nothing happened. The manager stood tall at the desk, confident. In his mind, he was winning. He had control of the room, control of the staff, control of the situation. What he didn't realize was that control built on disrespect always creates witnesses. And witnesses remember. Keanu crossed his legs slowly and leaned back. He wasn't angry, but he was no longer passive. He watched the manager closely now, how he spoke to employees, how his tone changed depending on who stood in front of him. Respect for some, contempt for others. The pattern was clear. Another 30 minutes passed. The manager checked his watch impatiently, not because of Keanu, but because someone else important was expected to arrive. He glanced toward the entrance, then back at Keanu. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, not recognition, doubt. Keanu noticed that too. He knew something the manager didn't. Moments like this have consequences. Not loud ones, quiet ones, the kind that unfolds slowly and then all at once. Keanu looked toward the front desk one last time. Not to demand service, not to complain, but to make a decision. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because the waiting was almost over. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't be shouted. It would be undeniable. If you saw someone being treated like this in public, would you step in or stay silent? Something had changed. Not in the lobby, everything still looked the same. The marble floors still shined. The front desk was still busy. But Keanu Reeves was no longer waiting. He was watching. He noticed things most people missed. How the manager's voice softened instantly when certain guests approached. How staff straightened their backs when he walked past. How no one ever questioned his decisions even when they didn't make sense. Power wasn't loud here. It was quiet, routine, unchallenged. Keanu had seen this before. Not in hotels, but in people. The kind of authority that survives only because no one tests it. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. Not impatiently, intentionally. From this angle, he could see the reflection of the front desk in the polished floor. He didn't need to look directly anymore. The manager laughed again, too loudly this time. Keanu noticed the timing. Every laugh came when someone important was nearby. Every smile disappeared the moment they walked away. That wasn't confidence. That was performance. A senior staff member approached the desk quietly and handed the manager a tablet. The manager glanced at it, then frowned. Keanu caught that too. Something wasn't going according to plan. The manager looked toward the lobby entrance again, then around the room. For the first time since Keanu arrived, his eyes paused, not recognition, assessment. Keanu didn't look back. He adjusted his posture calmly and crossed his hands again. Still no phone, still no complaints. That unsettled the manager more than anger ever could, because anger is predictable. Silence isn't. A guest nearby leaned toward Keanu and whispered, "You've been very patient." Keanu smiled politely. "Sometimes patience tells you more than questions," he replied. The guest nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Across the room, two staff members exchanged glances. They weren't whispering about Keanu anymore. They were whispering about the manager. Why is he making him wait? I don't know, it's strange. Strange was dangerous. Because strange invites attention. The manager felt it. His movements became sharper, less relaxed. He began correcting staff more aggressively, pointing, interrupting, dismissing. Not because something was wrong, but because control was slipping. Keanu noticed the pattern tighten. This wasn't about a room anymore. It was about ego. A senior concierge approached the manager and spoke quietly. Keanu couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The manager's jaw clenched. "No," he replied sharply. "Not yet." The concierge hesitated. "But sir," I said no. The finality in his voice silenced the conversation. The concierge stepped away. Keanu watched that exchange carefully. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive, but decisive. The manager had chosen to double down, and doubling down always comes right before the fall. Keanu exhaled slowly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't offended. He was disappointed. Not for himself, but for everyone watching this happen and learning the wrong lesson. That respect comes from appearances. That silence means acceptance. That power is permanent. Keanu stood up again. This time no one ignored it. A few heads turned. The manager noticed immediately. He straightened his jacket and prepared himself, expecting confrontation. But Keanu didn't walk to the desk. He walked toward the seating area near the entrance, toward visibility, toward witnesses. He stopped near a pillar and leaned casually, arms relaxed. Still calm, still saying nothing. But now he was impossible to ignore. The manager watched him closely, pretending not to. A quiet tension settled over the lobby. The kind that doesn't come from shouting, but from anticipation. Keanu glanced at the entrance again. Someone important was about to arrive. Not a celebrity, not a guest. Someone the manager couldn't dismiss. Keanu knew this because he had already made a call earlier. Not to complain, not to demand, just to confirm something. The manager checked his watch again. This time, his foot tapped the floor impatiently. That small movement betrayed him. Confidence doesn't fidget. Keanu remained still. A staff member approached Keanu cautiously. "Sir," she said softly, "would you like some water?" Keanu smiled. "That would be kind. Thank you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The manager noticed that too. Kindness was shifting toward Keanu now. Not orders, not authority, respect. And respect is contagious. The water arrived. Keanu thanked her. No sarcasm, no performance. Just courtesy. A nearby guest whispered, "Who is he?" Another replied, "I don't know, but something feels off." They were right. Because moments like this don't end quietly. They end clearly. The manager finally made a decision. He walked toward Keanu slower this time. Measured, not dismissive, cautious. But before he could speak, the front doors opened. And everything the manager thought he controlled was about to be tested. The front doors opened softly. At first, no one reacted. Another guest maybe, another arrival. But then something subtle happened. A man stepping into the lobby slowed his pace. His eyes fixed on Keanu. Not curiosity, recognition. He stopped walking completely. For a second, the noise of the lobby faded. Not because it actually became quiet, but because attention shifted. The man whispered something to the person beside him. That person looked again, then again, and then their posture changed. They straightened. Across the room, the concierge noticed it. Then another staff member. Then someone at the front desk leaned slightly forward, trying to understand why a guest would suddenly freeze like that. The manager noticed the hesitation. He followed their line of sight, straight to Keanu. Still calm, still quiet, still waiting. The manager frowned. Something wasn't right. Two guests near the entrance began whispering openly now. "That's him, right?" "I think so, yeah. I'm sure." One of them discreetly pulled out a phone, but to confirm. Their face changed instantly, eyes widening, mouth tightening. They looked around the lobby as if suddenly aware they were part of something bigger. The staff felt it too. Movements slowed, voices dropped. The manager felt the shift before he understood it. He leaned toward the front desk clerk. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. The clerk hesitated. "Oh, I think that's—" "Think what?" The manager snapped. She stopped herself. "I'm not sure, sir." But she was sure. Everyone was. The manager glanced back at Keanu. Really looked at him this time. The calm posture, the absence of impatience, the way people unconsciously gave him space. This wasn't a man waiting helplessly. This was someone choosing to wait. That difference hit hard. A guest finally spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry. "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" The name didn't echo. It landed, like a dropped glass in a quiet room. The manager stiffened. He laughed once, short and forced. "No," he said quickly. "That's not." But his voice trailed off, because no one agreed with him. No one laughed. The front desk clerk swallowed hard. Another staff member nodded slowly, almost to themselves. "Yes," someone whispered. "That's him." The manager felt heat rise in his face. He looked around, searching for confirmation that this wasn't happening. But the looks told him everything. Recognition was spreading, and recognition changes behavior fast. A senior employee stepped closer to the desk. "Sir," he said quietly, "should we assist him now?" The manager didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened. 2 hours ago, he had dismissed Keanu with confidence. Now the room was watching, and for the first time, the manager realized this wasn't about celebrity, it was about witnesses. Because everyone had seen how Keanu was treated before they knew who he was. And that made it worse, much worse. The manager walked toward Keanu. His steps were slower now, careful, calculated. "Mr. Reeves," he said, forcing a smile, "I apologize for the inconvenience. We had some confusion earlier." Keanu looked up, calm as ever. "No confusion," he replied gently. The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than shouting. The manager's smile faltered. "I assure you," the manager continued, lowering his voice, "we'll take care of everything immediately." Keanu didn't stand, didn't rush, didn't acknowledge the offer right away. He glanced around the lobby instead, at the staff who had been silent, at the guests who had watched, at the people who were now paying attention only because they recognized his name. That pause said more than words ever could. A woman nearby whispered to her friend, "He waited 2 hours and now they care." Her friend shook her head. "That's messed up." The manager heard them, every word, and suddenly, apologies didn't feel powerful anymore. They felt late. Keanu finally spoke. "I wasn't waiting because I had to," he said calmly. "I was waiting because I wanted to see how people are treated when no one thinks it matters." Silence followed, not awkward, heavy. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to argue with, because this wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, and observations don't need defense. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others stared openly. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a mirror. Keanu stood up slowly, not in anger and finality. "I don't need a room now," he added. That sentence stunned everyone more than the reveal itself. The manager froze. "Sir, please." Keanu raised a hand gently. "Please," he said, "take care of your staff. They deserve better." He turned toward the exit. No applause, no cheers, just silence. The kind that forces people to think. Do people deserve respect only after they're recognized, or before? Because at that moment, the hotel wasn't embarrassed because Keanu Reeves had been ignored. It was embarrassed because it had revealed exactly who it was when it thought no one important was watching. And the consequences weren't over yet. Keanu had taken only a few steps toward the exit when the atmosphere finally broke. Not with shouting, not with chaos, with urgency. The revolving doors stopped turning as a man in a dark suit entered the lobby, flanked by 2 senior staff members. His posture was different. Not rushed, not impressed by luxury, authority without effort. The manager noticed him instantly, his face drained of color. "Sir," the manager said quickly, stepping forward, "I wasn't expecting you so early." The man didn't respond right away. His eyes moved past the manager, straight to Keanu, and then his expression changed. Not surprise, recognition mixed with discomfort. "Keanu," he said calmly, walking forward, "I was told you might stop by." The lobby froze. This wasn't a guest. This wasn't staff. This was someone above the manager, much higher. Keanu nodded politely. "I didn't want to make a scene," he replied. "That's why I waited." The sentence landed hard, because now everyone understood something important. Keanu hadn't lost control. The manager had. The man in the suit turned slowly toward the front desk. 2 hours, he asked, no anger in his voice, just confirmation. The manager opened his mouth. There was a misunderstanding. The man raised a hand. "I didn't ask why," he said. "I asked how long." Silence. The front desk clerk spoke quietly. "Just over 2 hours, sir. That was all it took." The man nodded once. Then he turned to Keanu again. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "This should not have happened." Keanu didn't argue. He didn't accept the apology either. He just said, "It happens more than people think." That line hit harder than any accusation. Because it wasn't personal, it was systemic. The man in the suit took a breath. "Let's talk privately," he said, gesturing toward a side office. Keanu shook his head. "No need," he replied. "Everyone here already saw what matters." That choice changed everything. This wasn't damage control anymore. It was accountability. The man turned back to the manager. "Step away from the desk," he said calmly. The manager hesitated, just for a second. Then he obeyed. Staff members watched in silence as the man took the manager's place behind the desk. Not symbolically, literally. "I want every staff member who interacted with Mr. Reeves today to stay," he said, "and everyone else to continue working as usual." He looked at the staff. "If you were told to stay silent earlier, you're not anymore." No one spoke, but shoulders straightened, eyes lifted. The man turned to Keanu once more. "You don't want a room," he said, "but you waited long enough to earn a say." Keanu looked around the lobby, at the guests who had watched quietly, at the employees who had been afraid to speak, at the manager standing off to the side, no longer in control. "I don't want punishment," Keanu said calmly. "I want standards." That was the moment the lesson became unavoidable. This wasn't about fame or embarrassment. It was about behavior. The man nodded. "You'll have them." He turned to the staff again. "If anyone here is treated differently based on appearance again, you come directly to me." The manager swallowed hard. No yelling, no humiliation, just removal of power. And that's the kind that lasts. The man stepped back. "I'll handle the rest internally," he said. Keanu nodded once. Then, without another word, he walked toward the exit. This time, people didn't stare, they moved. Doors were held open, space was given. Not because he was famous, because he had shown restraint. As Keanu reached the doors, a young staff member called out softly, "Sir." He turned. "Thank you," she said. "For waiting." Keanu smiled. "For noticing," he replied. And then he left. Behind him, the lobby remained quiet, not awkward, reflective, because everyone there had just learned something uncomfortable. Respect doesn't begin when someone is recognized. It begins when no one thinks recognition is coming. And the hotel. It would never feel the same again. The lobby didn't return to normal right away. Even after Keanu Reeves walked out, no one rushed to fill the silence. The piano music kept playing, but it felt distant now, like background noise to a thought everyone was processing. People stood where they were. Staff didn't move immediately. Guests didn't speak. Something invisible had shifted. The man in the dark suit remained behind the front desk, quietly reorganizing what had already been running smoothly, at least on the surface. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give speeches. He simply worked. And that somehow felt heavier than punishment. The manager stood off to the side, no longer in charge, no longer surrounded by confidence. Without the desk in front of him, he looked smaller, not humiliated, exposed. The staff began moving again, slowly at first. A bell rang softly. Keys were handed over. Luggage rolled across marble floors. But things were different now. Employees made eye contact with guests longer. They spoke more carefully, not out of fear, but awareness. A senior staff member quietly pulled aside the young employee who had spoken to Keanu earlier. "You did the right thing," she said. The words were simple, but they mattered, because moments like this teach people what is allowed. Or what isn't. A guest approached. He'd asked. The man in the suit nodded. "Yes," he replied. "It will be." That answer wasn't for her. It was for everyone. Behind the scenes, decisions were already being made. Policies reviewed, complaints revisited, patterns questioned. Not because a celebrity had been involved, but because witnesses had been. People had seen what happened before the name was known, and that's what couldn't be erased. The manager was asked to leave for the day, not escorted, not argued with, just removed from the position he had taken for granted. As he walked past the lobby seating area one last time, he avoided eye contact. No one stopped him, not out of cruelty, but because the moment had passed. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. People hurried. Keanu Reeves blended into the crowd like anyone else. No cameras, no headlines, just another person walking away. But inside the hotel, the lesson stayed. Later that evening, a staff meeting was held. Short, direct. The man in the suit didn't mention Keanu's name. He didn't need to. He spoke about standards, about dignity, about how power reveals itself when no one is watching. Respect, he said, is not a reward. It's a baseline. No one argued, because everyone had seen what happens when that line is crossed. Days later, guests would still mention the incident quietly, not with excitement, with reflection. He waited like everyone else, one said, and that's what exposed them. Another replied, imagine how many others were treated that way. Those questions lingered, and they mattered more than outrage ever could. For the staff, something changed permanently. Not policies, but confidence. The confidence to speak, to pause, to question. Because silence had been broken once. And once broken, it's harder to rebuild. Keanu never followed up. He never posted, never complained, never claimed credit. That was the point. Real influence doesn't announce itself. It leaves evidence. The hotel continued operating. Rooms filled. Guests came and went. But there was an unspoken awareness now that everyone is watching. Not for fame, for fairness. And that's how quiet accountability works. It doesn't explode. It settles. It forces people to look at themselves without distraction. And maybe, just maybe, it changes the next decision someone makes when a person sits down and waits, without looking important. Should respect be automatic, or only given when someone proves who they are? Because the truth is simple. How you treat people when you think they don't matter is exactly who you are.